daughter-in-law handed me a cardboard box and told me to get out of my own house. I didn't argue. I just picked it up, walked to the door, and left. But when I got to the end of the driveway and looked down at what was in my hands, I couldn't breathe. There was $340,000 in certified checks inside that box, and underneath them, a folded note in my son's handwriting. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the story behind it. My name is Gerald. Wait, no. My name is not important. What's important is that I'm 67 years old, I spent 41 years as a pipe fitter in Fort McMurray, and I came home to Ontario when my wife passed. That was 3 years ago. 41 years of shift work, overtime, and saving every dollar I could, because Elaine always said we were going to retire somewhere quiet, with a garden and mornings that didn't start before 4 a.m. She died before we got there. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to gone. I don't talk about it much. I just carry it. After the funeral, I sold the condo we'd had in Calgary and bought a place in Barrie. A proper house. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a garage where I could keep my tools and pretend I had things to fix. My son Nathan was living in Mississauga with his wife Bev. They had a 2-year-old and another one on the way, and money was tight the way it always is when you're young and paying GTA rent. I told them to move in with me. I had the space, I had the time, and honestly, after losing Elaine, the silence in that house was the kind that sits on your chest. Nathan said he'd pay rent. I told him not to bother. He said he'd cover utilities at least. I said fine, whatever makes you feel better. We shook on it. That was the first mistake I made, not because of Nathan, but because of what came next. I didn't know Bev well. We'd been at the wedding, we'd had Christmas dinners, we'd smiled at each other across tables. She was always polite to me. That kind of polite where you can't find anything wrong with it, but it never quite warms you up either. I thought that was just her personality. Some people take longer to open up. I was patient. I had time. They moved in on a Saturday in September. Nathan drove 2 loads from Mississauga in a rented van while Bev organized the kitchen and told me, gently but clearly, that she'd prefer to keep her things separate from mine. I nodded and moved my dishes to one cabinet. I thought that was reasonable. A woman wants her own space in a kitchen. That's fair. By December, I had 1 cabinet. I'm not saying it happened all at once. That's the thing about these situations. You don't see the pattern when you're in the middle of it. You just see individual moments, and each one seems small enough to let go. Bev mentioned that the TV in the living room was too loud. I started watching in my room. Bev said the smell of my morning coffee was too strong for her first trimester. I started making it in a travel mug and drinking it outside, even in November. Bev thought it would be better if I called before coming into the kitchen when she was cooking, because she needed her concentration. I started knocking on the door to my own kitchen. Nathan never said anything. I'd look at him sometimes across the dinner table, and he'd look back at me with this expression I couldn't read. Not guilty exactly, more like a man who was holding something underwater and getting tired. Their second child was born in February. A boy. They named him after Nathan's grandfather on Bev's side, which I understood. I held him once in the hospital, and Bev watched me the whole time with her arms slightly raised, like she was ready to catch something. I handed him back after a few minutes and said he was beautiful, which he was. After that, things changed. I think having 2 children made Bev feel more entitled to the space, or maybe it just gave her more confidence. One morning I came downstairs and found the contractor in my living room. Bev said she'd hired him to quote on converting the garage into a playroom. My garage, where Elaine's boxes were still stacked in the corner, because I hadn't been able to go through them yet. I told her that wasn't going to happen. She looked at me the way you look at a child who doesn't understand something obvious. She said the children needed space to play, and the garage was just sitting there, and surely I could find another place for my things. I said the garage was mine and it was staying as it was. She said, "This is our home too." I said, "Yes, it is." and the mortgage is my name. That night I heard them arguing through the wall. I couldn't make out the words, but I could make out the tone. Bev's voice rising and Nathan's falling, rising and falling, until eventually there was silence. The next day, Nathan came to find me in the garage. He sat on an old cooler and looked at his hands for a long time before he said anything. He said Bev was finding it difficult living here, that she felt like a guest, that she needed to feel at home somewhere or she was going to lose her mind. I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said maybe they could put their names on the title, just to make things feel more settled. I sat with that for a moment, then I said, Nathan, this house is your mother's retirement. It's everything we saved. I'm not putting anyone else's name on it. He nodded slowly. He looked relieved, actually, like I'd said the thing he couldn't say himself. But Bev had heard us to the door. She came in and stood in the garage doorway, and the look on her face was different from anything I'd seen from her before. Not polite anymore, not even trying to be. She said, you've never trusted us. I said I trusted Nathan completely. I said that wasn't what this was about. She said if I trusted him, I'd treat him like an equal in this family. She said I'd been making her feel unwelcome since the day they arrived. She said the children are growing up in a house where their grandfather made their mother feel like a visitor. I didn't know what to say to that, because I'd been walking on eggshells in my own home for over a year, and I still somehow ended up as the one who made her feel unwelcome. Things were cold after that. We were civil. We passed each other in the hallway. We ate dinners with the children between us like a buffer zone. I tried talking to Nathan alone a few times, but he was always distracted or busy or just not quite there in the way that told me he'd already had a version of this conversation with Bev, and it hadn't gone well for him. Then in April, something shifted. I came home from a walk one afternoon, and there were two people in my kitchen who I didn't recognize. A man in a blazer and a woman with a folder. Bev introduced them as her cousin and her cousin's partner. They were real estate agents. She said they'd just stopped by to have a look at the house. I asked what they were looking at the house for. Bev said they thought the market was strong and it might be a good time to consider options. I said there were no options to consider. The house was not for sale. She said that, at my age, the equity in the house could set me up very comfortably for the rest of my life. She'd been looking into assisted living facilities in the area, and some of them were very nice. I stood in my kitchen and looked at my son. He was standing near the stove. He didn't look at me. I asked the two agents to leave. Politely. They left. I told Bev that I wanted to speak to Nathan privately. She said there was nothing that couldn't be said in front of her. I said, Nathan, look at me. He looked up. His face was like something under glass. I said, do you want to sell this house? He said, Dad, I just want everyone to be okay. I said, that's not an answer. Bev said, what he means is that this situation isn't sustainable. 3 adults and 2 children in a house where one person holds all the power isn't a family. It's a landlord arrangement. I said, you never paid rent. The room went quiet. I left. I went to the garage and I sat next to Elaine's boxes for a long time. I put my hand on one of them. She had her handwriting on the side, just a list of what was inside. Kitchen things and photo albums and a tin of buttons she'd collected since she was a girl. I sat there until it got dark. That night, I called my daughter. I didn't know I was going to until I was already doing it. Daphne lives in Halifax. We talk a couple times a month, the usual check-ins, but I'd never told her what was happening in the house. I didn't want her to think badly of Nathan. I didn't want to be the kind of father who pits his children against each other, but I told her that night, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which is not something she usually manages to do. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to not dismiss it. I said, go ahead. She said, do you have a lawyer? I said I had a will. She said that wasn't what she asked. I called a lawyer the next week. A woman in Barrie who came recommended by a friend from my pipe fitting days. I sat in her office and explained the situation, and she listened and took notes, and at the end she said I needed to understand that my good intentions had created a legally complicated situation, and that I should document everything going forward. She said to keep records of any financial contributions, any alterations made to the property, any conversations about ownership. She said to do it quietly. I started keeping notes in a small book I kept in my jacket pocket. I also changed the pin on my home safe. I'd never thought I needed to. The safe had my will in it, my investment account numbers, the title documents for the house. I was glad I did because 2 weeks later, I noticed the safe had been moved slightly. Someone had tried to open it. I didn't say anything. I just took the documents to my lawyer's office and left them there. Then things escalated in a way I wasn't prepared for. I came home one Tuesday afternoon to find Nathan waiting for me at the kitchen table. Alone. He looked like he hadn't slept. He asked me to sit down. I sat. He put a folder on the table between us. Inside was a printed form, a transfer of property ownership, adding both his name and Bev's to the title of my house. He said Bev had had her cousin prepare it. He said he didn't ask her to, but she'd done it, and he thought I should know. I said, Nathan, did she ask you to bring this to me? He said, yes. I said, and what do you think I should do? He looked out the window. He said, I think you should say no. Something loosened in my chest when he said that. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. He looked back at me, and his eyes were tired in the way that told me he'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. I said, tell me what's been going on. He told me, slowly and then all at once. He told me that Bev had been tracking my finances. She'd been watching my online banking on the shared household laptop. I hadn't known it was shared, I'd thought it was mine. She knew the approximate value of my investment accounts. She'd been building a case to her cousin for months, that with my assets and the house equity, there was significant money that would eventually be divided between Nathan and Daphne, and she wanted to move it into a structure she could influence now while I was still cognitively okay. That was the phrase she'd used. Cognitively okay. I'm 67. I do the Globe crossword every morning. I track my investments, and I do my own taxes, and I can name every prime minister back to Diefenbaker. I thanked Nathan for telling me. I asked him if he was okay. He said he didn't know. I said that was honest. That night I called Daphne again. She'd already booked a flight. Daphne arrived on a Thursday. Bev didn't know she was coming. She walked in with a carry-on and hugged me in the front hall for a long time, and then she went to make tea. I watched her in the kitchen and thought about how much she looked like Elaine. The way she moved. The way she filled the kettle. Things were strange for a day. Bev was polite to Daphne in that particular polite way of hers, the way that shows no seams but lets no warmth through. The children were happy to see their aunt. Nathan was quiet. On the second day, Daphne asked Bev if they could talk privately. I don't know exactly what was said. I sat in the garage and read a magazine and listened to the birds. When Daphne came to find me an hour later, her face was composed in a way that told me the conversation had been difficult. She said, Dad, I think you need to ask them to leave. I said I knew. She said, Nathan won't fight it if it comes from you. I said I knew that too. I gave them 30 days' notice in writing because my lawyer had told me to do it properly. Nathan thanked me. He said they'd start looking right away. Bev didn't speak to me for the rest of the month. On the day they left, a moving company came with a truck. I stayed in the garage with the radio on. I heard them going back and forth through the house. The doors opening and closing, the children asking questions in their small voices. At one point, the little girl came to find me. She was 3 years old. She climbed up onto the cooler where Nathan used to sit and handed me one of her drawings. A house, a tree, a stick figure with gray scribble hair that I think was supposed to be me. I put it in my jacket pocket. Then Bev came to the garage door. She had a cardboard box. She held it out toward me without coming inside. She said it was my things. Some books from the living room and a few photos and some paperwork she'd found in the kitchen drawer. She didn't look at me when she said it. I took the box. She turned and walked back to the moving truck. I heard Nathan's voice somewhere near the driveway and then the truck door closing, and then it was quiet. I looked down at the box. Something was wrong with the weight of it. I set it on the workbench and moved the books aside. Underneath them were two envelopes. One was thick, bulging. I opened it and sat down without meaning to, because inside was a series of certified checks, 9 of them made out to me totaling $340,000. The second envelope was smaller. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Nathan's handwriting. Dad, Bev doesn't know about this. She won't. I've been putting money aside for 3 years in an account she can't access. It's savings from before we met, from my years in the trades, and from some investments you don't know about because I didn't want to make things complicated. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't have the courage, and I'm sorry for that. I know I didn't always stand up for you the way I should have. I know you noticed. I'm sorry for that too. This is yours. It was always going to be yours. I just wanted to give it to you myself instead of letting you wait for something to happen to me. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it properly. Nathan, I sat in the garage for a very long time. I don't know how long. The light changed. I heard the birds come back. At some point, I realized I was hungry, which seemed strange. I went inside and made myself a sandwich and stood at the kitchen counter eating it and looking out the window at the backyard where the lawn needed cutting and the garden Elaine had always wanted was still just dirt and ambition. I called Daphne. She'd gone back to Halifax the week before. When she picked up, I said, "Your brother left me something." She said, "I know." I said, "You knew?" She said, "He called me. About 2 months ago, he wanted to know how to get a separate account set up without Bev knowing. I helped him figure it out. I sat with that. My daughter in Halifax and my son in the same house as me, working quietly together to take care of me while I sat in the garage talking to the walls. I said, "When did you two become so sneaky?" She laughed. It was Elaine's laugh exactly. I had to hold the phone away for a second. 6 months have passed since that day. Nathan and Bev are in a rental in Guelph. From what Nathan tells me, things between them are not good, but that's not my story to tell. He comes to visit most weekends. We work in the garage together, or we watch the game, or we just sit. Bev doesn't come. That's her choice, and I respect it. I use some of the money to put a proper garden in the backyard. Perennials, mostly. Cornflowers and black-eyed Susans and a lilac bush along the back fence. Elaine would have had opinions about the placement of everything. I can almost hear them. I also finally opened her boxes. Not all at once. A few at a time when I felt ready. The tin of buttons was exactly where I knew it would be. If I've learned anything from all of this, it's that kindness without boundaries is not actually kindness. I let people into my home because I loved them, and I thought love meant giving everything without conditions. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family together. It took losing my kitchen cabinet by cabinet to understand that you can love someone and still say this is mine, and it is not available. Nathan told me recently that when Bev handed me that box at the garage door, she genuinely thought it was just books and old papers. She didn't know what he put inside. She handed me that box thinking she was dismissing me, and without knowing it, she was delivering the most important thing my son has ever done. I still have the drawing the little girl made. The house, the tree, the gray-haired stick figure. I put it up on the wall of the garage where I can see it from the workbench.